Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to Curate, the title of today's webinar. My name is Rima Ghanem, and I will be your moderator. Today's webinar is the second from the series, The 5 C's of Knowledge Management. So if you missed the previous session, it's available for you on the Lucidea website. Before we begin, allow me to introduce our company and our esteemed guest speaker. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our solutions help manage and deliver access to organizational collections and knowledge, and we serve a broad range of organizations of all sizes and budgets. Presenting this webinar is Stan Garfield. Stan is a respected knowledge management practitioner, author, speaker, and community leader. He has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website, so please feel free to check those out after today's session. Stan, thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rima. Thanks, everybody, for attending today's webinar. It's the second in our series on the 5 C's of knowledge management. Last month's webinar, we covered the first C, capture. Today, we're going to cover the second one, curate. What do we mean by curation? Curation is something that in knowledge management isn't probably talked about as much as some of the other C's, but I want to make sure that people are aware of the importance of it. We mean by curation taking existing information and multimedia content and making it more useful, and we do that in several ways. We can better organize it, we can make it easier to find, and we can make it easier to use. One of the people that I've written a profile about, Paul Corney, has had this to say about what we call knowledge managers. He's drawn to the term knowledge curator, which in his mind very much plays to the idea of preserving and maintaining knowledge assets. So we don't often hear people refer to us as knowledge curators, but Paul's point is that that's an important part of what we do as knowledge managers. And so much of what passes for knowledge management is about creating and storing content and making it available for reuse, but it's more than the role that was formerly undertaken by information professionals and librarians. We're talking about being a custodian of organizational knowledge. So if we think about it that way, that's a fairly important role, and curation then becomes an important part of what we do as knowledge managers. Knowledge curators, that part of what we do as knowledge managers is to allow people to use information and multimedia content by collecting it, by selecting it, by assembling it, presenting it, and distributing it. So last month we talked about the capture part of knowledge management, which is the collection. But going beyond collecting it, curation means doing things with what you've collected. So selecting from a longer array of material, assembling it into an order that can be useful, presenting it in such a way that it can be understood and found and reused, and distributing it so people receive it and are aware of it. Exploiting knowledge and a personal passion is part of what curation is. And that can be professional knowledge and passion, it can be expert knowledge, it can be personal knowledge. So all of these are parts of what curators do. They take a combination of their professional background, their expertise, and also their personal interests and passions. And when you apply those to knowledge, then the curation that results from that can make it so that other people are able to benefit from it. Why should we curate? Well, it's not enough to just collect content and make it available in a large repository. If that's all that we did as knowledge managers, and that was what early knowledge managers tended to do in the earlier days of knowledge management 30 years ago, the emphasis was on collection, putting it in repositories, and assuming that people could then find it. But we've since learned that that's not sufficient. And curation is a way of taking what's been collected and then making it more easy to find and making it more easily used. So selecting and highlighting the best of this content can greatly simplify effective reuse. So the more content that people have to wade through in order to find that which they need, the harder it is. But as curators, if we make it easier to wade through that content, because we've done it for the user, and pulled out the most important parts, then they'll appreciate that. Knowledge managers are usually better at finding information than others in the organization. That's one of the reasons that we become knowledge managers, is that we're good at that. We shouldn't assume that everyone is equally good at finding information. So those of us who are better at it can then help the others who aren't as good at it by helping them find material and assembling it in a way that makes it easy for them to use. We can enable people to get the information they need by curating it for them. So that's why we should curate. We'll talk about three main kinds of content that curation can really help in a knowledge management program. We'll talk about best bets that apply to search. We'll talk about frequently asked questions and discussions, online threaded discussions where communities tend to talk about different topics. Let's start with search. The challenge with enterprise search is that knowledge managers are frequently asked, why can't our enterprise search be more like Google? If you've worked in a knowledge management role, you've probably had this question asked of you. Sometimes we struggle with the answer because we're all used to using Google ourselves, and we can usually find things that way out on the internet. And then the question is, why can't it work that way inside of an enterprise? There's several reasons. One is it's impossible to match the scale of the internet inside a single enterprise. The Google PageRank algorithm works well on the internet because there's so much content out there. There's so many users. And when you're in the millions and millions of users and millions of pages of content, then its algorithm can work by looking at how many pages point to other pages and so forth, and using that as a way of refining search results. But inside of a company, you don't get that kind of scale. It may be only thousands or hundreds or tens of pages or users or links, and therefore it doesn't work the same way. So that's one reason why the Google PageRank algorithm won't work inside a company. But it is possible to emulate other functionality that Google offers other than this PageRank algorithm. One way of doing that is to curate search best bets. So we've all had the experience of working with Google and seeing results come up in search results that aren't requiring you to click on a link and go through. You see some information actually presented right on the search results page. And you can do the same thing inside your company with search. So if you make content more intentionally provided, then when people search, rather than having them have to click through all the links and evaluate the material that's underlying, they can be presented with information right on the search results page, some of which may exactly be what they need, and they don't have to go any further. In order to do this, we have to take some steps to figure out what kind of content we should provide in that way. So one way to do that is to start by determining the topics of greatest importance to your organization. You try to figure out, what are the top 10 or top 20 or top 30 or whatever the number may be for your organization, things that the people are most interested in, they tend to search for the most, that form the essence of your organization. So that could be a list of, let's say, 20 important topics, or it could be a list of 100 important topics in a larger organization. But whatever that list is, you start by figuring out what that list is. Then you can proceed to curate a list of relevant content for each of those topics. Then that can be searched and filtered based on your list of key topics. And then you can feed the entries as part of enterprise search results. So if you know in advance what people tend to be looking for, and you find out what the best answers would be for those queries, then you can make your search engine bring up those results prior to all the other things that may come up in a search. And for the best content for each of these key topics, you can provide curated answers, best bets. These can be thumbnails, brief descriptions. They can be links. They can have additional information. Beyond that, they could have authoritatively badged content, meaning that some expert has tagged the content as being the best and the most definitive. And you can also have quick answers, which are more complete content. So it's not just a few sentences, it can actually be a whole page worth of content, and then links for additional details. So all of those things are the kinds of things you can bring forth as best bets. Now, when you're curating the search results, you can do things like regularly conduct searches on the topics of greatest importance to your organization. And you can look for both internal and external results. So you can search within your organization using enterprise search. You can conduct searches outside of your organization using Google, and then you can bring back content that you believe would be of greatest value to your users, and then make that available in response to queries that they post. You can select the most relevant and valuable results, compile them, provide them as answers, and publish them in posts and as web content. So let's say you're doing this searching and you find out that there's something missing. This gives you an opportunity to go out and try to provide the missing content. You might not be able to provide it yourself. You might contact subject matter expert in that topic and say, look, we don't have anything on this, but this is deemed to be one of the important areas for our organization. Can you please help us by contributing a document or writing up a brief description or whatever? Usually someone will have something, they just haven't contributed it yet, and you've identified this need by your searching. And then if they provide it, then you can use that as your best bet in the search results. So search results can be a combination of picking from the best currently available content, can also be filling in gaps by getting additional content to be contributed and then using that as part of the search results. So for users, there are things that they can do to help with curating search results. It's not just the knowledge managers that can help with this. Users can help because they can give feedback on the search results that they get when they conduct a search and let the knowledge managers know which of these results have been useful to them and which have not. And one way to do that is to provide a way for them to click a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the search results they receive. So if you implement this, then you have a mechanism where in your enterprise search engine, when the results are presented, you provide a little button next to each one that allows them to click a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or a like or a dislike, or whatever mechanism you wish to use. But that feedback from the users then can help you decide which of the results should be a best bet. You can also tag content with something like I reuse this or I found this valuable. If you have a way of doing that, like a like button in social media, then the content itself can carry this attribute. And if you find content that has multiple I reuse this tags on it, that's a sign that it's probably one to offer up as a best bet. You can support this indirectly from users' point of view by what they visit, the most visited web pages, the most downloaded documents that come from search results. If you keep track of that with your metrics, that's essentially a passive way of figuring out what content to offer up as a best bet. So let's say that you have a website that gets visited 10 times more than any other website for a particular topic. That's probably the one to put first in your search results, or actually say is a best bet for that particular topic. If you have a document that's been downloaded a lot more than some other document in response to a search. For example, you do a search, you come up with 10 results on the first search results page. If the third document is the one that's most downloaded, then you can say, well, let's make that a best bet and have it rise to the top. So the next time someone does a similar search, that'll be the first thing that they see. And that's the one that most people have downloaded in the past. So that's not infallible. They may have downloaded a document and turned out that it wasn't valuable, but it's one indicator that you can use. So by a combination of explicit mechanisms such as clicking thumbs up or thumbs down, or tagging content with I reuse this or this was valuable, or you can use the more passive approach of statistics, how many pages were the most visited and which documents were the most downloaded. I'm talking about best bets. These are the expected results when searching. When you do a search, you're certainly hoping that what comes back at you will be led by something that meets the expectation that you had. If you're asking a question, what's the answer? If you're looking for a resource, what's the resource? And so if the results come back such that the top ones are the ones people expect to find. Your search is doing a good job. And this is better than a long list of links. So we've all had the experience of doing a search and being presented with a bunch of links, none of which looks terribly promising, some of which are hard to decipher. A lot of the times you wonder, why is that in the search results? And the only way to figure it out is to click on it, perhaps download a document and have to read through it in order to figure out, is this the thing that I'm looking for? So instead of a long list of links, users prefer recommendations so they don't have to look through all those links. So things like best bets or answer cards or information that's presented right on the search results page, if it meets the need, that's far preferable than having to look through the list of links, click on them, open all the documents, wade through it all, sort through it, read it, and then figure out, or do any of these meet my needs, right? But if instead you get a result right on the page that looks like what you need, that's really what users are looking for. And they're conditioned to see that now because of using tools like Google and Bing. When they do searches, they're expecting to see these kinds of answers come back. So if you can provide the same kind of functionality, that's one way in which you can emulate Google inside your enterprise. Here's an example of a best bet. If you're inside of an organization that has a vacation policy, people may search for that to figure out what are the rules. So if they type in vacation policy in the search box, they may get back a number of different documents that include the word vacation. And it may be hard for you to figure out which of those is actually what you're looking for. But if you see that lots of people search for a vacation policy, which you can look at in your search logs, then you can say, well, let's make sure that the official policy comes up as a best bet. So the next time someone types vacation policy, instead of wading through a long list of documents that say vacation in them somewhere, if they get a first result that looks different, it's differentiated, it has a special icon with it, or it's offered as the first search result, or it says best bet, and that's the one that comes up, and that will be helpful to your users. They won't have to look at all the other ones. They say, yep, that's what I'm looking for. It's right there. That's what I expected. They then get what they need. They can go to their search, to their vacation policy page, read through it, and get their answer. So this allows your users to get the information that they need right away without wasting time of looking through results or having to read them all, which can really then to become frustrated. So if you knew the vacation policy is out there, but you had to spend 15 minutes looking at other irrelevant documents, you're going to become frustrated by that. So you want your users not to feel that way. You want them to feel satisfied. And so for all these kinds of frequently searched for terms, you should have best bets that respond to the most likely expectation your users have. Another thing that you can provide are thumbnails. Thumbnails for each of the key topics can be the best content with brief information about it. So it gives a glimpse of the information up front, and it may prevent them from having to click the link. So if they read the thumbnail and it turns out that's not what they're looking for, they can just look at the next one and so forth and keep reading thumbnails until they find one that looks like it's the one. Then they can click the link and go to that page rather than having to do multiple clicks. So a thumbnail then is extracting some highlights from each one of the search results, presented in a way that the users see it, can read it quickly, and determine whether or not that link is the one they want. There's also authoritative badging. What this means is that you provide some kind of special designation on content that says this has been actually approved by the right people. Could be that it's an official policy, so the people that create that policy are the ones who are the authorities in that case. It could be that it's some kind of content that an expert needs to weigh in on, and that therefore the authoritative person in that case is the expert. So whatever that authority is that would be trusted by others in the organization, if you have a way of that authority and only of that authority tagging the content as being recommended, that can be a way of sorting through all the other content. So this can be done with a special star or a check mark or some other icon that you choose that's attached to the search result that's been approved by that authority. So if you have a mechanism for doing that, you might designate certain authorities, certain experts certain people who are in charge of a particular aspect of your organization. And then they have the ability, and only they have the ability, to add the special icon. So let's say it's an expert, and you have a set of experts identified for each important topic. You give them this functionality where they can add the check mark or the star next to the content they consider to be approved. And then that's not going to be next to other content. That doesn't mean the other content wouldn't be potentially useful. It just gives people an idea that this content's been reviewed and that therefore you can trust it a little bit more. Secondly, if you don't have a lot of time to read through everything in the search results, then you can just go right to this authoritative content and start there. So as a result, when people are doing a search and they receive many pieces of content back in the results, if one of them has an authoritative badge, they can view that one first. And if it meets the need, then they're done. Let's talk about some quick answer categories you might want to consider for your curated search results. These categories would include the organizational structure. So for instance, have categories for each of your key organizational functions like finance and human resources and legal and so forth. Could be based on a formal taxonomy. That could be an industry taxonomy that's standard across the industry, or it could be an internal taxonomy based on how you define things inside of your organization. So for example, it could be the global industry classification standard. That would be an example of an external industry taxonomy, or it could be your enterprise taxonomy that you've defined inside of your organization. But whatever, if you have those taxonomies defined, then you can pick out the terms from the taxonomy you consider to be the most important and have quick answers for each of those. Could be based on the products and services that your company offers. So for example, the Android phone or consulting services. And so therefore, if you have answers for each of those, people tend to look for the products and services that your company offers, and so have some quick answers for each of those products and services. Could be based on topics, for instance, security or supply chain management. Could be based on industry, electronics or pharmaceutical as an example. These categories could also be based on the major clients that you have. So it could be, for example, GE or the US government. Could be partners that you work with, your organization has a relationship with, for instance, Ford or Microsoft. The category could include locations, so Latin America or Detroit. Could be based on specialties and roles that people in your organization play, for example, project management or information architect. And finally, it could be based on demographics. So you might want to have a category for new hires or retirees. So these are examples. Obviously, you can think of others for your organization. But if you look at your organization through these filters and come up with good thumbnails and quick answers and best bets and so forth for each of these types of categories, then you'll probably be ready for just about any question that's frequently asked, because you'll already have thought through the different ways that people will be looking, different ways that people tend to think, and you'll have some content identified in advance that you can provide so that people don't struggle with the lack of good answers. How can you choose search results to provide as quick answers? You can ask for submissions from content providers. You can ask the people that contribute to your repositories, what do they think should be in your quick answers? You can match the existing intranet navigation. So if you have a navigation that's based on your org structure, then you can have your search results match that structure. You can ask key contacts for each category what they consider important. So after you've gone through and figured out what the categories are, and figure out then who are the key people in each of those categories, go and ask them, what do you think is the most important thing we should provide as a quick answer for that category? You can ask in your enterprise social network and in your online communities of practice and get suggestions from them. So if those communities match the categories of your important topics, then it's very logical to go to each one of those communities and say, hey, for this topic, what do you think the most valuable content is that we should provide? You can review your enterprise search logs and see what people have been searching for. It's a really good way to see the most frequent searches. Make sure you have answers for those searches. You can review web analytics for your websites and your downloaded documents and see which ones are visited the most and which ones are downloaded the most. And they can help you figure out what to provide. You can review the websites and documents that are liked or tagged as useful by your users. Go to your help desks that you have inside the organization and ask them, what are the most frequent queries that you get and what are the replies that you provide, and make sure those are provided as quick answers. You can also look at queries that are posted in your enterprise social network that people tend to ask over and over again. And then you can look at all your published frequently asked questions and pick out from them maybe the ones that should be offered up as quick answers. So these are ways that you can find out what people are looking for, what other experts think are the most valuable responses, and then provide them in advance. Now we'll move to the second area I want to talk about today, which is frequently asked questions. We just referred to them as one of the areas that you can look at for figuring out what your quick answer should be. But curating frequently asked questions is the second very important part of what knowledge managers do. People tend to ask the same questions over and over again. And you can try to tell people that they shouldn't do that and they should search through online discussions and find these answers before they ask them again. But human nature is to not to do that, it's to go ahead and ask it again. And when they do, it's nice to have the answers already assembled so that you don't have to start from scratch each time. These questions can get answered through many different channels. They may ask questions over the phone, online, through chat, might turn to the person sitting next to them, through email. There are a lot of ways that questions get asked, but it's hard to find where all those questions have been answered. So all through those different channels, answers may have been provided, but they're not available in any one place. And searching to find those answers can be frustrating and ineffective. People that are trying to find the answer to a question will ultimately sometimes give up because they can't figure out where it is, or if they ask their question in the wrong place, they don't get the answer. So if you take time to create, update, and maintain frequently asked questions, there can be benefits to that. One is that people can actually read through the frequently asked questions as if they are articles, and you've probably had opportunity to do that when you're looking to find an answer to something and frequently asked questions are provided. You can scroll through them looking for ones that might relate to the question you have. And you can also learn a fair amount about questions that you didn't think of, but because they're in there already with the answers, you learn something by reading them. They offer rapid and accurate answers to questions that people have. They eliminate the need to keep answering the same questions over and over. And they can supplement enterprise search and community discussions with already curated content that you can point to and reuse rather than having to regenerate each time the question comes up. So that could mean that as part of your enterprise search, you feed FAQs, as we just mentioned, is one potential way of providing quick answers. And also in community discussions, you can point to those previously existing FAQs rather than having to type them all out again each time. So what's the process for creating FAQs? First of all, if you review the threaded discussions that are already taking place online in communities of practice and the questions that take place in enterprise social network posts and email messages that get sent to help desks and any other channels that you're aware of where questions tend to get asked and answers get provided, you can review all of those and then you can identify repeated queries. What are the questions that come through over and over again? And for those queries, you can copy those answers into lists, and then you can manage and maintain those lists to update them and keep them current to ensure accuracy. So it starts with mining questions that are already being asked and answered in various channels, and then pulling them out of those channels and putting them into a known place where your frequently asked questions reside, and then maintaining those so they don't become outdated or inaccurate, but then using them as a place to point to when the question gets asked again. Sources of FAQs can be text-based queries. So these can be questions that people write in, and you can copy those out and paste them into a list, and then you can synthesize the best answers. So there may have been a question asked in a community, and there were multiple answers given. And when you create the FAQ, you do a little bit more than just paste all the answers. You actually can look through all the answers and figure out what's the combination of all of these that's the best answer, not just any one of them. So let's say there's one question asked and there's 5 answers provided. what you end up doing is you copy some of each of the 5 answers and put them together and edit them slightly into one really good coherent answer. That's what you want to have in your FAQ. For phone calls that come in asking questions, you can record them, you could transcribe them manually, or you could use speech-to-text tools to transcribe them automatically. But some combination of text and phone calls is where questions are being asked. If you can get them out of those places and into your FAQ lists, then people can read them in advance, they can refer to them later, and you can point to them when you're answering questions in the future. The destinations for frequently asked questions can be in lists, databases, and knowledge bases. So you can choose for your organization which work the best for you, but somewhere where the content that you put can be easily referenced, it can be sorted and searched and filtered and easily updated as it needs to be. And then you can regularly add to it over time as new questions become available. As you identify out ones that are being asked frequently in the future, you can add them to your frequently asked question list or database. And you can go back and edit the existing answers as needed, as things change, as better answers get provided, and so forth. Now, one of the ways to do this is to use list functionality. I've had experience doing this at several organizations using Microsoft SharePoint, which has nice structured lists as one of its pieces of functionality. And a Microsoft SharePoint list allows you to create, maintain, and view your frequently asked questions relatively easily. And those lists can be filtered, so you can have it filtered by a certain keyword. They can be sorted, so you can put them into certain order, and they can be easily searched, so you can look through the list and find particular terms so that you can find that the answer is there already and then provide it. You could also use other knowledge bases and things that are used in customer call centers. So pick the tool that you may already have or you think best fits what you need. But if you already have a tool like SharePoint, then you can use its list capability for your frequently asked questions. Here are some sources for mining content for your FAQs. So it can be community threaded discussions, or where questions are being asked and answered. It can be in enterprise social network groups. Questions come into help desks through calls and emails and texts and chats. So whatever channels your help desk uses, those are all places that you can go and look for questions and answers. They can come to reference desks as calls, emails, texts, and chats. They can go directly to subject matter experts as calls, emails, texts, and chats. So these people get contacted in a variety of ways: help desks, reference desk, experts. And if you poll all of these sources and say, what are your questions that you're being bombarded with, then they can mine those different channels and come back to you with the content that you want to put in your frequently asked questions. They can also be questions that get asked frequently during calls or in meetings, so that people that ask these questions get their answers compiled and put into the FAQ list. You can also find them in enterprise search logs, the things that people tend to be looking for, and pull out those and put them in FAQs. And they can be in chat channels. People may be using Slack or Microsoft Teams or some other chat channel. And if the questions come up a lot there, then that's something that you would want to pull out of them, because they tend to be private, and you want to pull those out and maybe make them into more public source. The use cases for FAQs can be a variety. We'll start with the reference desk. If you're a library user calling the reference desk and you ask the question, how do I access the rare book collection? That'd be easy for the person in the reference desk to then say, oh, if you look, here's a link to our FAQs. That's number 5 in the list. If you go there, you'll get all the details on how we use our reference desk. How we use the rare book collection, excuse me. A community member can post a question in an online discussion. For instance, how do I start a new community? And the person who responds to that can say, here's a link to the FAQ that answers that question. And what will tend to happen is not only will the question be more thorough and more accurate, more up to date, but there's no effort involved, right? You don't have to write out a long answer, or you might skip it because you're tired of writing it out again and you missed something important. But in the FAQ, you can have all the important information, and all the person has to do is link to it rather than having to type it again. An example of an FAQ from my use of Yammer when I was at Deloitte. Question, how should I use Yammer? So people would often ask that question, why should I use it? How should I use it? What's its purpose? And then I would have an answer to it that went like this. Use the Safari's acronym to remember how to use Yammer. Safari stood for share, ask, find, answer, recognize, inform, and suggest. So that would be a way for them to remember all the 7 key use cases of Yammer. And then I'd say be selective in what and whom you follow to limit the noise in your followed conversations. Ask questions using topics and groups so that others can answer the questions and see the answers. Ask yourself before sending an email or posting to a private group, could I post this in a public group instead? And if so, do that. And search Yammer before posting a link or creating a group to see if that link has already been shared or if a similar group already exists. So these are, this is an actual example. This is an actual FAQ answer. So you get an example of the kinds of things that you would want to say. Now, if you were just answering that question off the cuff without having this already predefined FAQ, you might miss some of this. You might just give a simple answer and miss out on some of the other parts. But by having all of this carefully curated in an FAQ, then when you point to it, they get the full benefit of all that answer. Another example, also from the Yammer FAQs that we used at Deloitte, reduce noise and information overload in Yammer. So there would be all these specific examples. And so I'm not going to go through all of them on the call, but you can see that the FAQ gets very specific. And it's got all the detail that one would need, including the steps to follow. And the idea is being this thorough, you'll give the best answer each time, and you won't forget to say something, you won't miss something, and it's all there. But over time, you can come back and improve it. If you figure out that there's another way to do this, you can add it as another step, or you can edit one of the existing steps to be better. So FAQs are not only some place to copy something once, it's also a place to edit it as you go along. Third example from Yammer, how do I mention someone to get their attention in Yammer? So in mentioning someone, you type an @ and then their name, and it tells you about how to find the right person. If that doesn't work, then here's what you can do. And you can also use a box below the box and put a plus sign in. And this is an easier way than this other way. So the point is, what we've done here is we've assembled a lot of tips relative to this question. It's not just the simple put an @ in. There are these other nuances to the answer. And FAQ lists and knowledge bases allow you to have all of that extensive information so that nothing is lost and people get the full benefit of all the experience that you've had in figuring out this stuff, so they don't have to go and try and figure it out and get frustrated. The third area we'll talk about curation, threaded discussions. We've already talked about search results and FAQs, and then there's threaded discussions. In any community, there's going to be discussions, and communities are one of the most important components of any knowledge management program. So there's a lot of good things going on in those communities, and curating the discussions can really help the community to be more effective. So curating threads can help them to be more easily located. If you have a community that's had a lot of discussions, if it's been around for a long time, it can be hard to go back and find a conversation that you remember being there and you think has useful information in it, but you can't find it when you want to go back and find it. So curating the discussion can make it easier to find those old discussions. It can help ensure that the discussion gets read, because when someone receives a notification that there's a new post or a new thread, if it's not clear as to what that thread's about, the person may ignore it. But if you get it properly curated with the right title and the right tagging and so forth, it's more likely that people will go and read it, because now they know, oh, that's about something of interest to me, whereas the original title might not have suggested that. It can prevent splintering, where threads get broken up into different places and they're not connected and you don't get all of the answers together in one place. It can keep related posts together. So instead of them being in different places, they can be together and you can find all of them using a single tag. They can avoid broken links. That tends to happen over time. The discussion that happened a year ago may have had a useful link in it that's not working today, but if it had been updated with a new link, it'd still be useful. And it can maintain the accuracy of information. There could have been an answer which was correct at one time and is no longer. There may be a different answer today, and you can go back and replace that old one with the correct one. So let's talk about the ways that you can curate discussion. The first way is through tagging. You can add hashtags to connect related threads. Without doing this, it can be very hard to find out all of the times that something was discussed in a community. You can try to do that by searching on a keyword, but there may be different keywords that are used for the same concept, and you may not find them all if you rely just on search. But when you use a tag, which is very deliberately used to connect threads together, then it's possible to go back, click on that tag, and see all of the past discussions that are relevant to the thing you're interested in. So for example, if there have been a number of discussions in a community about collaboration, and if you add the collaboration hashtag next to each thread where that's discussed, then any community member can click on that hashtag and then find all the threads where collaboration was discussed. So that becomes very powerful because in a long-standing community, there'll be a lot of these great discussions, and you don't want them to be lost or forgotten. You want to be able to find them and find them all together related to the same topic. Another function of curation of a discussion is to rename the discussions. Many times when people start threads, they don't think this through. They just put in some kind of bland or nondescript title, or they may not put any title in at all. And as a community manager, you can remedy that by going back and renaming the threads so that they're useful. So an example of that is something that happens frequently. Someone will put a title that says question for the group or something like FYI, and that won't convey anything meaningful. And therefore you may miss what it's really about. But you can go back and edit that title to something meaningful. So the question for the group does not adequately explain what the thread is about. And therefore, if you rename it with something like, what archiving software are you using? Now people can see that title and say, oh yes, that's something that I can answer, or that's something that I'm interested in, or no, I'm not interested in that at all, so I can just ignore it. But with question for the group, you won't know, is this something I should read or not? So it makes it more likely that other members will read the thread if it's of interest to them, and then it will be findable later. So if someone searches on archiving, that they can find that thread versus the original title. So renaming can be a powerful form of curating online discussions. Now there's another function which is merging threads that get started and that get splintered. So often in the community, people will start up a thread, someone else will respond, but maybe use a different title, or they'll start up a new one, but it's really on the same one that was already going. There may be a variety of reasons. Sometimes mail systems will automatically add certain phrases like ext for an external message, and that changes the title so it doesn't get grouped together where it should be. So if any of these things happen, or if a responder decides to change the subject line but probably shouldn't have, then merging threads can remedy that. So posts that are in the same discussion but get slightly different subject lines and get otherwise separated can be put back together. And some tools allow threads to be merged, and that's a useful way of keeping the threads that belong together. Now, not all tools will work this way, but in these examples that I'm giving here, I'm using the tool that we use for the community that I lead, which is called the SIKM Leaders Community. It's a community of knowledge management practitioners. And we have had online discussions for the last 18 years. So there's a lot of content there, but I take time to make sure that when this happens, when discussions get splintered, that I merge them back together so that I can find them later and they're all connected. Now, the opposite of that can happen where something in a thread where it doesn't belong. They respond to a thread that's started, but they're talking about something else, or they're unaware they replied to a discussion about, so they just thought they were making a new post. And then it's helpful to split that off so that it's not lost in the place where it doesn't belong. Put them in a separate thread, keep all your posts together about the same topic. You can also do other things with threads, which is editing them. You can fix broken links in old posts or new ones. Sometimes when I do an edit of a current post, they failed to make sure that the link was working. It didn't get hot linked. It's just sitting there as text. So a simple fix to go in and make it hot linked so it can be clicked on. Or it may be a broken link, so you put the correct link in. Or there may be a misspelled name. I often am sensitive if you misspell the name of one of the community members. I go in and fix that so the name is correct. Add information that was missing. Perhaps somebody intended to include something, but they forgot to. Or there's information that's outdated. Well, any of those become valid reasons to edit threads. Just have to be careful that you don't edit a thread in a way that the original poster would not appreciate. If you change the meaning of what they said, if you misinterpreted something, they can become annoyed with you. So be careful when editing threads if you're the moderator, but put in a way that you think is pretty sure to be viewed as helpful by both the original poster and the other members. Another thing you can do is to remove. So you don't want to do this very often. It's rare, but on occasion, a post may be offensive, could be obsolete, it could be inaccurate. If any of those conditions apply and you can't solve them merely by editing them, then a removal may be required. So an example could be, there could be an ancient thread that started up and no longer has any relevance at all. If someone were to find it, they might get confused and think it's still relevant. In a case like that, there's nothing valuable about it. It's best to remove that. It has no historical value. It can't be used at all. There's no other part of it that's useful. In a case like that, removing it can help prevent confusion, so no one will look at it, waste time reading it and trying to learn from it when in fact it's wrong. What else should you curate besides the three we've talked about already? You can curate collections. So if you're in a library, that could be books or images or recordings or art. You could curate the organizational hierarchy, contacts list, org charts, responsibilities. This is something I used to do at Digital Equipment Corporation, which is one of the most valuable pieces of content in the company. People wanted to know who did what, who was who did they work for, what were they responsible for. I curated that list and updated it every month. You could curate a list of job openings so people know what positions are available. Curating the navigation structure of your intranet so that it's current and relates to the current org structure and has logical breadcrumbs so people who are navigating through the intranet, it makes sense to them, they can find what they need. You can curate news, selecting and highlighting the most relevant stories. Curate resources. I do that for knowledge management on my website. A list of recommended sources, helping people who are trying to learn about a field by recommending things for them to look at. Curating success stories, good examples. You can take those right out of threaded discussions and use them as a way of proving the value of your knowledge management program, for example. What better way than to take actual quotes from people who are posting in your online communities and say, look, this post starts out with someone asking a question, someone else answering it, and the first person who asked it saying, thank you, that's just what I needed, that really helped. Well, that proves by pulling it out that that was valuable. And if you put that into a collection of success stories, that can help your program as well as help people who are skeptical figure out that they should actually participate in your program. Curating your taxonomy, monitoring it, adding it, editing tags can be an important part of knowledge management. If you have methodologies, collecting those, publishing those, recommending them, and promoting them is a form of curation. And intelligence, if you have internal intelligence, if you have outside intelligence, market intelligence, competitive intelligence, whatever it may be, taking that in such a way that you make it useful to people, you organize it in such a way that it's not just a random collection of stuff, but it's easy to digest and use. And there's plenty of other examples, I think, that you could think of where curation applies. Just any kind of organization or structure or assembling, collating that you do for knowledge to make it better for other people is curation. How can you curate? You can curate using a blog. In a blog, you can compile useful information and collect sources. You can use a wiki where you have a communal base of knowledge and you ask other people to help with curation. You might get it started, but other people may come and add and update it. Subscriptions, where people can subscribe to and pass along valuable content is a way of curation. So I mentioned that the key context list at Digital, I curated it every month. I offered that up as a subscription. People could subscribe to it. There were over 30,000 people to subscribe to receive an updated version of it every month. Redirection and extraction. If you receive email queries that you can point people to the FAQ content, then that's a way of curating so that they're pointed to things rather than you having to answer them again. Archives, by retrieving and restoring and locating things in an archive. I do this a lot in the Internet archives for broken links that once worked but don't work anymore. I can go back and use that same URL in the Internet archive, which is also known as the Wayback Machine. I can usually find an old version of it that was archived in there. A snapshot was taken at some previous time, and then that can be used in place of the broken link. Deletion, removing obsolete, redundant, useless, and offensive content unless there's some significant historical value. Updates, where you test links and replace old versions with new ones. On your intranet, you can offer multiple forms of navigation with top 10 lists, relevant and timely homepage news, different kinds of orders, the most popular items. These can all be forms of curation on your intranet. If you have portals and digital workplaces, you can provide customized content to users based on their roles, their locations, their language, their preferences. That's another form of curation. And document management systems, where recommendations can be provided for the most valuable content, is a form of curation. Example from my own personal curation, I spend a lot of my time on curation. I have historically done that both inside of companies that I've worked for, and I continue to do it for the field of knowledge management. So on this right-hand side, you see an extraction from a page that I call Knowledge Management Resources that has a bulk of links to other resources, including communities and conferences and consultants and so forth. So anything you want to know about knowledge management, you can probably find on my website. And so I have been doing that curation for many years, and it includes blog posts and resources and news about knowledge management. So I encourage you to use that, but also to use it as an example of curation that you may want to mimic at a lesser scale, perhaps, but still it gives you an idea of what I do, and you might want to use some of that both internally and externally in your own work. Now, the series that I'm doing currently for Lucidea in their blog called Thinking Clearly is called the Thought Leader Series. And every week when we're not in the midst of doing one of these webinar series, I've been providing a profile of a different KM thought leader. And when I do that, I search for content about that thought leader, and I retrieve their old articles, and I find things in the internet archives that are no longer available online, but were once available, and I collate that material in the form of an article where everything that I could find that I thought was valuable is put in one place. And so you can read that article and learn about that person, but also you could find all their useful content that otherwise existed as just scattered resources out on the internet at large. It's now been pulled together in one place. And many times the people that I've written the profiles about have told me that they really appreciate this, that this is something that they themselves don't have. They don't even know where all their own content is. But now that I've done it for them, they appreciate it. And that's an example of where curation pulls together diverse content into one place. And the final example is from the SIKM leaders community that I mentioned that I lead. We have online threaded discussions, and there have been thousands of threads over the last 18 years that I've actively curated with the techniques that I've mentioned of merging, splitting, tagging, editing, deleting. We have monthly calls. So we curate information about those monthly calls. All of them are available. The presentations, the recordings are curated in lists within the community. And then the presentations and files are all there. So curation can apply internally, it can apply externally, but as knowledge managers, that's really something that we should consciously be doing. Here's an example from when I was leading the knowledge management program at Hewlett Packard. The Knowledge Network was the intranet page where we brought together all of the resources that were relevant to knowledge management. So you talk about the different forms of navigation. We had on here a top 10 documents list, a top 10 presentations list, top 10 web pages, top 10 top tools. And so that was one way of sort of curating for people and saying, out of all the things that we could be showing you, these may be the most useful. We've done the extra work of extracting the top 10 of each of these 4 categories. We also have then lists to news, to services, to reports, to success stories. It's all here in one place. So this is a good example of curating a pretty wide range of content in a single place with an eye towards making it possible for someone to visit a single site and get to everything that they want. So we've reached now the end of the presentation. I'll turn it back over to Rima to wrap up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this presentation, Stan. And to our audience, a complimentary piece to this webinar would be Stan's latest book, The 5 C's of KM. This publication is an excellent resource for special librarians and information professionals. It explains how and why incorporating the 5 C's of KM supports departmental and professional sustainability and ultimately benefits the organization. So don't hesitate to download your free copy at lucidea.com/the5Cs of KN for special librarians, as you see on the screen. And if you'd like to reach out to us, whether you have questions or comments, here are our contact details. We're always happy to hear from our audience. Now, on behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending today, and until next time.